Bienvenue. Thank you very much to everyone for being here today for this very important topic for our briefing called The Sham Regulation of Radioactive Waste in Canada. Merci beaucoup à tous d'être venus ce matin. Notre briefing s'appelle Un simulacre de règlement sur les déchets radioactifs. Before we jump in, I will give you a quick briefing on the Zoom logistics today.
Thank you. All right, for everyone who might be new to the Zoom platform, you'll notice when you came in that your microphone is muted and your webcam is off. That's to protect the sound quality for our call today and for the recording that we're making. During the webinar, if you have questions, we have disabled the chat, so you won't be able to use the chat feature, and there's no need to use the electronic hand raising feature. What you can do is hold your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll see a series of icons. You can click on the Q&A button, and there's a window that will pop up where you can write your questions. So you're welcome to put questions into the Q&A box at any time during the webinar, and we'll take those questions at the end of the session. Thanks.
So today our 5 experts will be making presentations on the regulatory documents on radioactive waste management that are currently being considered by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Ils présenteront leur analyse des 5 documents réglementaires que la Commission canadienne de sûreté nucléaire devrait examiner cette semaine, jeudi le 18 juin. So CNSC is expected to make a decision to review these regulatory documents at their meeting this week on June 18th. And there is a lot at stake because there are many nuclear plans in Canada underway. This spring, AECL quietly renewed a $1 billion a year contract to manage the federal government's radioactive waste and contaminated nuclear sites. The consortium under this contract, which runs Canadian nuclear laboratories, has these ambitious plans that include building a massive on-surface mound for mixed radioactive wastes at Chalk River, entombing early model reactors, notably located on the Ottawa River and the Winnipeg River, by filling them with concrete rather than full decommissioning. Leur vision comprend aussi le développement de petits réacteurs modulaires, d'abord à Chalk River, ensuite à travers le Canada, dont plusieurs destinés au nord canadien. De plus, l'industrie nucléaire canadienne continue à chercher un site en couche géologique profonde pour enterrer les déchets nucléaires de haute activité provenant des réacteurs. Donc, ces documents réglementaires de la CCSN sont si importants parce qu'ils ouvrent la voie à tous ces projets controversés. These CNSC regulatory documents are very important to consider because they pave the way for all of these controversial projects. The CNSC is moving quickly to approve, at least to consider these regulatory documents. Yet Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan promised earlier this year to consult all Canadians and Indigenous peoples on a policy framework and a strategy for managing radioactive waste in this country. We are asking that the REGDOCs not be adopted or approved in a vacuum until this public consultation has taken place and we can have a policy and a framework developed with Canadians with the oversight of parliamentarians, not by the staff of an appointed body. We will now hear from our presenters on each REGDOC for about 3 minutes each. They will speak in either French or English or alternating with all the slides being bilingual. We will then take your questions through the written Q&A function. Nous aurons maintenant 5 présentations en français ou en anglais. Les diapos sont bilingues et nous prendrons ensuite vos questions. So next slide, and I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Teresa McClenahan. She is the Executive Director and Counsel of the Canadian Environmental Law Association, and she will give us the introductory overview. Teresa.
Thank you, Eva. The current context arises in a situation where Canada was subjected to an International Atomic Energy Agency regulatory review last year. And the results of that review were announced in the fall. And following their recommendations, Canada made a commitment to review its existing policy for radioactive waste and to consider how it may be enhanced to give effect to the principles stated in the radioactive waste policy framework, including the establishment of an associated strategy. However, without waiting for Canada to develop this policy, the Canadian Nuclear Regulatory Staff are seeking approval this week from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission for REGDOC, regulatory documents dealing with radioactive waste. Civil society, such as our group, requested the opportunity to provide input to this commission meeting this week, but were denied both written or oral opportunity to do so by the commission. Therefore, we are providing today a briefing to media and parliamentarians about what is at stake and about our concerns about the approach the CNSC is taking. Next slide. This particular diagram comes from the CNSC in describing its regulatory framework so that you understand what regulatory documents are. We have the legislation, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Act, and then regulations that are authorized under that legislation. Both of those would set out binding provisions. Then you also have licenses and certificates issued by the Commission authorizing certain activities or facilities, and those again would be binding on the licensees. And then finally, you have the guidance documents that we're discussing today, which are regulatory documents setting out the expectations of the regulator, but not in themselves binding unless and until they're implemented by way of, for example, licenses. Next slide.
Je demanderai maintenant à Ginette Charbonneau, physicienne du ralliement contre la pollution radioactive. Elle va nous parler du premier tome de ces documents réglementaires au sujet de la gestion des déchets radioactifs. Ginette.
Bonjour. Alors, je voudrais vous dire que ce REGOP, il est imprécis, il n'est pas convivial, il est difficile à comprendre et surtout non prescriptif. On se demande comment un exploitant peut l'appliquer facilement et comment le public pourra vérifier qu'il y a un degré élevé de sécurité. This REGOP is imprecise, not user-friendly, difficult to understand, and not prescriptive. We wonder how licensees can easily apply the regulation and how the public will be able to verify that a high level of security will be achieved. Il y a beaucoup de confusion dans la classification qui est présentée dans le REGOP. Au Canada, il y a 5 types de déchets radioactifs. Faible activité, moyenne activité, haute activité et les résidus des mines et d'usines de traitement d'uranium. On va parler surtout des 4 premières classes. In Canada, there are 4 classes of radioactivity waste and residue from the mine. So low activity, intermediate activity, and high activity. Les catégories de déchets radioactifs sont ambiguës, surtout pour les déchets de faible activité et de moyenne activité. Les valeurs frontières entre les déchets de faible activité et de moyenne activité ne sont pas bien définies. Auparavant, on utilisait le débit de dose au contact plus grand que 2 millisieverts par heure pour décider que c'était un déchet de moyenne activité. Cette distinction a été retirée et n'est plus dans le REGOP. In Canada, the category of radioactive waste are ambiguous, especially for low level and intermediate level. The boundary between these two classes are not well defined. In the past, the near contact dose range greater than 2 millisieverts by hour was a criteria to differentiate between the two categories. This distinction is not in the REGOP. Prochaine diapo. Next diapo, please. Not only us, l'industrie also find that the classification is confusing in the REGOP. I will present you a commentary from Bruce Power, Canadian Nuclear Association, Canadian Nuclear Laboratory, NB Power and OPG. Alors, l'industrie aussi trouve que la classification est confuse dans le REGOP. Alors, voici leurs commentaires. Dans le REGOP, on ne précise pas qui classe les déchets. Le Canada a déjà 4 principales classes, mais le REGOP indique que les titulaires de permis pourraient avoir leur propre classification de déchets. In the REGOP, it's not clear who classified the waste. Canada has already 4 main categories, but the REGOP indicates licensees should classify the waste. Il n'y a pas de référence pour la source de classification et un manque de clarté dans la définition des déchets de moyenne activité. There is no reference for the source and a lack of clarity for the definition of intermediate level. Il faudrait clarifier qui peut classifier les déchets et ajouter la dose au contact de 2 millisievert. Okay, they should clarify who classify the waste and add to the definition of intermediate level weight using the near contact dose. L'impact sur l'industrie est très grave. Un manque de clarté peut entraîner une mauvaise compréhension des exigences et de leur justification par les titulaires de permis, l'autorité de régulation et le public. Cela peut entraîner le développement de classifications uniques par le titulaire de permis et une confusion quand on discute des déchets. Impact of industry. Of lack of clarity can lead to misunderstanding of requirements and the reason for them by licensee, regulator, and public. It may result in licensee developing unique classification and unintended confusion when discussing weight.
Ginette, 30 secondes à peu près. Il vous reste 30 secondes. Bon, disons 1 minute.
D'accord, OK. Alors, la réglementation n'est pas prescriptive. Ça, c'est très grave. La Commission tente d'implanter une réglementation non prescriptive. The Commission is trying to implement a non-prescriptive regulation. Okay? So why should we leave the licensee make its own classification? Pourquoi on laisserait le promoteur faire sa propre classification? Des règlements, c'est des règlements. Alors, la Commission de sûreté nucléaire devrait spécifier des critères précis pour définir le degré de sûreté pour chaque dépotoir. Tous ces renseignements devraient être accessibles au public et dans un langage que comprend le public parce qu'on veut savoir qu'est-ce qu'il y a dans les dépotoirs. On veut savoir c'est quoi les radionucléides. The Commission should specify the criteria to define the level of security for each waste dump. All elements should be accessible to the public. And many people claim that radionuclides should be listed in a language accessible to the public who want to know which radionuclide are stored in the site. It's for security. Thank you.
Merci, Ginette. Thank you. Now we will hear from Gilles Provost. He will take us through the REGDOC dealing with the safety case. Maintenant, Gilles Provost, du ralliement contre la pollution radioactive. Merci, Gilles.
Donc, la diapositive que vous voyez résume le message de ma présentation. Vous avez le français en haut, l'anglais en bas, et par la suite, ça va être vraiment des citations du règlement. Le tome 3 de ce REGDOC est consacré au dossier de sûreté du promoteur. Il explique comment un promoteur doit démontrer la sécurité de n'importe quelle installation où il voudrait évacuer des déchets radioactifs. The volume 3 of this REGDOC is completely about the safety case that a promoter must build to prove the safety of any kind of radioactive waste disposal facility. C'est un règlement non prescriptif, c'est-à-dire que toutes les solutions sont bonnes si le promoteur peut prouver que c'est assez sécuritaire. But how safe is safe enough? Even that endpoint is explicitly left to the promoter or licensee. That's why they call this a non-prescriptive regulation. Next slide. So, selon la loi canadienne, la Commission de sûreté nucléaire a été créée pour empêcher que l'exploitation de l'énergie nucléaire crée un risque inacceptable pour la santé des Canadiens et pour l'environnement. C'est sa mission. So even if the CNSC was created to prevent any unreasonable risk to health and to the environment, have a look at this Article 7.1 in this regulation. It says it's the licensee who must state the requirement to be met to ensure there is no unreasonable risk. Donc, non seulement l'article 7.1 dit que le détenteur de permis doit définir lui-même le niveau de sûreté qui serait acceptable, mais les articles suivants, l'article 7.2 et l'article 8.111 plus loin, disent qu'il doit aussi définir sa propre stratégie pour respecter ses exigences de sûreté et il doit déterminer lui-même les critères précis auxquels ses prévisions devront satisfaire. Prochaine diapo. So the only real norm that you will find in this whole regulation is right there in this same article. It says, post-closure safety assessment of disposal facility shall provide reasonable assurances that the regulatory radiological dose limit for public exposure, presently 1 millisievert per year, will not be exceeded for the normal evolution scenario. Donc, la seule norme du document, c'est une norme qui s'applique déjà aux centrales nucléaires et qui dit qu'aucun citoyen ne devra recevoir une dose toxique de radiation supérieure à 1 millisievert par année. Mais tout ce qu'on exige, c'est une assurance raisonnable qu'elle sera respectée et encore seulement pour le scénario d'évolution normale du site d'évacuation de déchets. Donc, uniquement le scénario le plus probable aux yeux du promoteur. The REGDOC also suggests that the licensee should aim for a somewhat lower dose constraint. It doesn't say how much lower, but it gives the example of the International Commission on Radiological Protection, which asked for 3 times lower. Et même si la contrainte de dose 3 fois plus faible que recommande la Commission internationale de protection radiologique n'est citée qu'à titre d'exemple, on avertit le détenteur de licence qu'il peut lui aussi mettre des contraintes de dose plus basses, pourvu qu'il soit possible de le faire à un coût défendable. Défendable. Next slide.
Gilles, les 4 minutes sont passées.
Oh.
Mais allez-y pour finir.
Okay, then. Okay. So, always without imposing anything, the same article also reminds the licensee that the International Atomic Energy Agency is also proposing criteria in case of human intrusion in a disposal facility. That's the main vulnerability when such a facility is built on a hilltop, as the Canadian government plans to do in Chalk River. Et qu'est-ce qu'il recommande de faire? Dans un tel cas, on dit qu'on doit, que si la contrainte de dose est atteint 20 fois la norme réglementaire canadienne ou 60 fois la dose la dose limite, à ce moment-là, ils peuvent quand même, then they can always proceed with their project and they only have to do a reasonable effort later on to somewhat reduce the probability of intrusion or to limit its consequence. En somme, c'est un simulacre de règlement.
Merci, Gilles. Thank you very much. So I would now like to introduce Dr. Ole Hendrickson, scientist and researcher with the Concerned Citizens of Renfrew County and area, to explain what the REGDOC say about decommissioning. Ole. Have we lost Ole?
I had to unmute, sorry. The CNSC dismissed public comments that its new decommissioning REGDOC conflicts in significant ways with IAEA safety requirements. The CNSC would allow reactors to be converted into waste disposal facilities and then be abandoned in place, rather than being dismantled and put in a purpose-built waste facility. CNSC calls this in situ decommissioning. The IAEA says this is not acceptable and is only a last resort for facilities that have been damaged in an accident. Next slide, please. The U.S. Department of Energy has itself entombed in concrete 3 reactors that were used to produce nuclear weapons materials, but it is also proposed entombment of civilian reactors. Next slide, please. AECL built 4 reactors that were shut down over 30 years ago, but have never been decommissioned. 2 US companies and SNC-Lavalin operate these federal reactor sites under contract to AECL through their subsidiary called Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, or CNL. These companies applied to CNSC to entomb the NPD and WR1 reactors. Now, CNL's president is a former DOE official. AECL's lead contracting officer was in charge of contracting for DOE weapons facilities. AECL's president is also an American who worked for the companies that are now under contract. A February 2020 IAEA report that Eva already mentioned warns against entombing these federal reactors. It suggests that CNSC consider revising its decommissioning requirements. However, CNSC is now proposing that future nuclear facilities may also be decommissioned in situ if their removal is not practicable. And CNSC is considering licensing a small modular reactor at AECL's Chalk River Laboratories that is not designed for removal. Next, please. AECL's Chalk River property is unceded Algonquin territory. Waste areas shown in red on this map that was done by the Ottawa Citizen. Those waste areas are contaminating lakes, streams, and wetlands that drain into the Ottawa River, which is 150 kilometers north of Ottawa. CNSC's new decommissioning REGDOC could enable CNL's plans to abandon some of these waste areas, as well as radioactive waste trenches at the Whiteshell Labs in Manitoba. CNSC would allow entombment of federal reactors and on-site abandonment of small modular reactors. We're asking the federal government to set aside this industry-friendly decommissioning REGDOC by using a public process to create decommissioning policies and strategies that respect Indigenous rights and protect our health and environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ole. The next presentation will be from Brenane Lloyd, Project Coordinator for Northwatch. Brenane, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva, and welcome everyone. My name is Brenane Lloyd and I work with Northwatch. We're a regional environmental non-governmental organization in Northern Ontario, and we have since our founding over 30 years ago been very concerned and highly involved with the tracking of developments around both the federal government's permissiveness and the nuclear industry's interest and intent to establish a deep geological repository burial site for all of Canada's high-level nuclear fuel waste. This regulatory document, REGDOC 1.21, provides guidance for geological repository site characterization. It's guidance, it's not a rule, it's not a regulation, it's guidance. It's a collection of ideas about how the industry could go about their tasks of characterizing the sites that they will then bring forward to licensing to get approval, seeking approval for the construction operation and eventual abandonment of a deep geological repository, which is a facility deep underground, 500 to 1,000 meters underground, a shaft, a series of tunnels and rooms in which they will place all of Canada's high-level radioactive fuel waste. That's the irradiated fuel from the reactors. This REGDOC is primarily information about how to evaluate the site that's being proposed, but is very, very general. It includes no requirement, only very general guidance. It replaces a document from 1987, R72, which did include requirements. R72 did need to be revised, updated, made more detailed, but this is not the document that meets the task of doing that. We saw a major shift in the document from the last document the public was invited to comment on to the final document, which is going to the commission on Thursday. The earlier draft largely ignored the later stage characterization, what's sometimes called underground characterization, after a site has actually been selected, a proposal is being developed, and the underground or the detailed characterization. First drafts largely ignored that. The final document focuses largely on that, largely ignoring the earlier stages, which are often referred to as site investigation. Overall, the document fails in numerous counts, primarily this failure to provide any requirements. It's a should, not a shall. This is different from all of the international documents that it references. The International Atomic Energy Agency has a number of safety guides or safety requirements. Those are shall documents. They have requirements. This document does not. Included among the failures are a complete failure to provide any assurance that the public will have access to the site characterization or the site investigation data as it develops, that the site will have, that the public or Indigenous peoples will have any input into what information is required, how it's analyzed, how it's stored, how it's made available, how it's considered in any eventual proposal brought for licensing. The approaches to information gathering outlined in this regulatory document have the flavor much more of having the goal of a repository approval rather than a proposal evaluation. Another significant failure is the lack of intersect between other regulatory documents or requirements, such as the safety case, which has failings of its own. But this document, this Canadian regulatory document, completely fails to establish those important intersects between the safety case that would have to be made for any proposal to move forward and the information that must be gathered on the way towards an eventual site characterization to be used in that safety case. And it is a document that fails to incorporate the limited opportunity the public had for input and fails to meet the test either internationally or the expectations of Canadians in terms of the kind of rigor that we would expect our regulations and our regulatory framework to bring. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Bernine. Thank you. The next presenter will talk to us about the fifth and final REGDOC. It concerns financial guarantees required of licensees. And I'll call on Teresa McClenahan again to speak to this.
Thank you. One of the concerns of both regulators and the public is the question of financial assurances. Financial assurances are often required as a condition of approval of hazardous activities. In the case of this REGDOC 3.3.1, one of the main purposes for asking for financial assurances for nuclear power plants and other facilities is to ensure that the costs of decommissioning can be met if the operator is unable to do so for some reason, such as failure of the business or otherwise. This REGDOC sets out various expectations, including, for example, that the Government of Canada would be able to call on the financial guarantee which must be immediately available and relatively liquid. The issue we are flagging in this briefing is a concern about how reliable this requirement is, given potential volatility in financial investments. Next slide. Section 4.2, next slide. Thank you. Section 4.2, which I just included on the previous slide, deals with that question of putting financial guarantee instruments in investments or relying on investments as a financial guarantee. We're concerned that the REGDOC doesn't address sufficiently or at all the questions that are listed here, such as what controls are there to ensure the safety and security of those financial investments? What guidance is provided as to the acceptability in risk terms of the financial investments, such that the value of the underlying guarantee instruments are not jeopardized? And we've seen examples of, huge volatility, of course, in the context of the current pandemic, including for instruments that wouldn't have been expected in normal times, to demonstrate the level of volatility they're experiencing. What peer review is provided in relation to the investment decisions of the licensee? What approvals or scrutiny is applied to the investment decisions affecting the securities that underlie those guarantees? How is that documented? Next slide. The additional concerns around security and reliability of the financial assurances have to do with what controls are available or remedies to the regulator or to the public, to the Government of Canada, in the event of decisions made by the investment holder that jeopardize the value of those underlying guarantees. Is there segregation from the potential risk of market volatility? We are also concerned about how frequently they're evaluated and the exposure to risks, and who reviews and ascertains their level of exposure. What qualifications are required for those individuals determining the compliance with any risk controls? Based on these concerns, we recommend that the Commission not approve this REGDOC in its current form this week until these issues are addressed in the REGDOC and furthermore required in binding regulations. If we had had an opportunity to make submissions to the Commission this week, we would have raised the concerns that we've noted in this briefing with the Commissioners, as Brene Lloyd will discuss next.
Thank you, Teresa. Back to Brene to sum up. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Eva. On Thursday, June 18th, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission will hold its public meeting. And at that meeting, they will consider the 5 regulatory documents that have been prepared and will be presented by staff. And it's a public meeting, as we've noted, without the public. There have been substantive changes from the drafts which the public commented on to the May 2020 drafts, which will be presented to the Commission. We have seen, and it is publicly available on the CNSC website, the staff submissions on this. And by our assessment, they're not a fair reflection of the public comment, and there was not a fair resolution of those comments which were submitted. And we note again that those comments were submitted on a much earlier drafts that have substantively changed between the February 2020 and the May 2020 drafts. We did write, the presenting organizations today did write to the Commission. We expressed our concerns about the regulatory documents going forward, both in the state that they are currently in and in light of Minister O'Regan's commitment to a review of Canada's radioactive waste policy framework and strategies. And the Commission replied that they would not defer their consideration of these staff documents. We then requested the opportunity to make written submissions and oral submissions on the revised drafts, and that request was denied twofold, both the opportunity to make written submissions, even written submissions, and the opportunity to make oral submissions or presentations to the Commission. So in 2 days' time, the staff documents, the staff produced regulatory documents will go to the Commission based on the information and the analysis that has been provided to them by the staff of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and the Commission will make their decision at that time. And I should just add that there is not an opportunity to observe in person, but the public meeting, the Commission meeting, will be broadcast through the CNSC webcast system. So we do have an opportunity to watch this virtual public meeting without a public.
Thank you very much, Brunane. That sort of addresses the first question about being able to present in public. Ole, did you still want to add something about that? No, okay. Again, I encourage you, if you have questions, to add them to the Q&As. All right, sorry, a couple have, there's one that has been answered, but let's start with the open question. What about the ethical aspects of investments such as fiscal paradises? Teresa, could you address that, please?
I'm sorry, Eva, could you repeat the question for me?
What about the ethical aspect of investments - fiscal paradises?
Right, so yeah, there's absolutely nothing at all in the REGDOC describing any aspect of ethical investments. So that's a very good point. That is the kind of thing the public may want to and should raise with the Commission in terms of the scrutiny of the investment choices made. And it may well be relevant into the question of reliability of the underlying value as well, because we know, for example, that climate poses risks to historical investments that may not produce the kind of financial returns in the future that they did in the past, in addition to the other ethical concerns associated with that. So yeah, that's a great point.
All right, thank you. So I just want to make sure we did answer this question about physically attending the meeting on Thursday. As mentioned before, no, the Commission's meeting will be an online virtual meeting. Monique Posé has asked us, j'aimerais mieux comprendre en quoi ces règlements auront un impact sur le projet d'enfouissement at Chalk River. More information is requested on how these REGDOCs would impact the near surface or on surface mound for radioactive waste that is planned at Chalk River. Gilles, est-ce que Jeanette, Ole? Pardon? Maybe Ole, would you like to address this in English, and then we could have a French version?
Okay. Well, just briefly, Jeanette has already explained that our concern about intermediate level waste being put in the mound at Chalk River. And the problem with the REGDOCs isn't so much what's in them as what's not in them, in my view. So Chalk River is Canada's only commercial radioactive waste storage facility. And a lot of the commercial waste is composed of gamma irradiation devices that have been manufactured by companies like Nordion and Best Barotronics. And those are very, very radioactive with cobalt-60. And our concern is that a above ground mound would not be an appropriate way to dispose of these highly radioactive cobalt-60 and cesium-137 devices that are currently in storage at Chalk River, and yet the proponents' waste acceptance criteria would allow such devices to be put in the mound.
Okay. Oui.
Oui, exactement. Si on change les critères de définition des déchets et que les déchets de faible activité deviennent des déchets qui peuvent être extrêmement radioactifs en incluant même des sources au cobalt 60 qu'il serait dangereux de toucher, bien, on change tout le débat public. Depuis le début du projet, on nous assure qu'on va mettre là seulement des déchets de faible activité et on se rend compte, quand on regarde les documents, que ce n'est pas vrai du tout. Enfin, que c'est vrai avec la nouvelle définition qui n'était pas encore officielle et qui maintenant va le devenir. Alors, on a l'impression qu'on change la ligne des buts au moment de rendre une décision et que les assurances qu'on nous a données étaient volontairement trompeuses, justement parce qu'on référait à des définitions qui n'étaient pas encore en vigueur.
Thank you. So passing to another question, please address the drinking water implications downstream, especially in Quebec. Alors, on pose la question, quelles sont les implications de ces règlements pour la qualité de notre eau potable dans la rivière des Outaouais, surtout au Québec? Jeanette, yes, please.
Oui. Okay, you are English, so I will speak in English. First, you know, if they put waste that have a longer life than the life of the dam at Chac River, we are not sure that there won't be any waste going into the river or into the nephriatic water. And one thing is that it is not possible to measure radioactivity in water because it's too much dilute, and the only ray that you can measure are gamma ray, not beta or alpha. So first, it's difficult to measure, and second, we have no insurance that on long term there won't be any spill in the water, because the membrane have a life of about predicted 550 years, but it is theoretical. So there are possible issues for the future generation.
Est-ce que tu peux résumer très brièvement en français?
Oui, c'est ça. Ce qui est dangereux, c'est qu'ils veulent mettre des déchets qui ont une vie plus longue que celle de la vie du dépotoir, parce que ce dépotoir a une vie utile prévue théoriquement de 550 ans, si les conditions sont bonnes. Et puis, ce qui arrive, c'est que les déchets, quand les membranes du dépotoir vont être oxydées, bien, il y a toujours un risque, dans certaines circonstances, qu'il y ait de l'eau qui pénètre dans la nappe néphriatique et qui aille dans la rivière, ce qui pourrait polluer l'eau. Et on ne peut pas vérifier ça facilement parce que la radioactivité, quand c'est des rayons alpha et bêta, ça ne peut pas se mesurer dans l'eau. Il faut seulement mesurer les rayons gamma. Et comme c'est très dilué, c'est très difficile à mesurer, même pour les émetteurs de rayons gamma. Ça fait qu'il ne faut pas minimiser, même une petite quantité de radiation peut avoir des effets sur la santé, surtout sur les embryons et tout ça, comme par exemple le tritium a des effets affecte beaucoup l'ADN des embryons. Merci.
Thank you. Merci. The next question. Has there been a consideration of an injunction against the holding of the June 18th CNSC meeting? Teresa, would you like to address that?
No, that's not something
Okay.
we've considered. No.
I would like to translate that, but I'm not sure about the term for injunction.
Une injonction.
Une injonction. Donc, la question était, est-ce qu'on pourrait demander une injonction contre la réunion de la commission cette semaine? Et la réponse est que non, on ne l'a pas considéré. Another question, has Stephen Guilbeault been made aware of the situation? He is the Canadian Minister of Heritage, former Greenpeace leader. Est-ce qu'on a approché Stephen Guilbeault, le ministre du patrimoine canadien, qui était un environnementaliste bien connu, anciennement avec Greenpeace? I believe the answer is no.
Generally, Eva.
Sorry?
I can answer that generally. It's
Yes,
Brunei
please.
White. All MPs received a letter signed by over 100 civil society organizations in the middle of May. And that letter outlined our concerns with these regulatory documents going forward and our very definite advice that the federal government instruct the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to defer their consideration of these regulatory documents until after the review had been completed of Canada's radioactive waste policy and strategies. That letter also addressed the need for a very public, transparent, and accessible process for that review. But yes, so as an MP, Monsieur Guilbeault would have been made aware of that in mid-May, and then again earlier this month received additional information and an invitation to this briefing. So he has been made aware, as have all MPs in Canada been made aware.
Thank you, Brené. Donc, tous les parlementaires, tous les membres du Parlement ont reçu une lettre à ce sujet avec nos points principaux et notre point de vue au mois de mai et aussi dernièrement. So here's a fairly lengthy question. How come these regulations are being issued before Natural Resources Canada develops its waste management policy? In other words, the CNSC is expecting the ministry and the federal government to adapt its future policy to these REGDOCs instead of the other way around. Is this a case of the tail wagging the dog? Also, are these regulations an indication of what the fairly new CNSC president intends to do as the new chair of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Safety Standards Commission, given she has stated her intention to align the Canada and IAEA's standards? Would this be a step towards weakening nuclear waste safety regulation globally? So there are really two questions there. So the first one, is this the tail wagging the dog? I'm wondering who would like to address that. Oh, no, sorry, Teresa. Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, so the first one, that is our point exactly, to the commission itself and to the minister, and the correspondence that Brené mentioned that a number of us sent, 100 groups sent to the minister and to all MPs, that the radioactive waste policy framework and its strategy needs to be done first, and then any appropriate revisions to the legislation, any appropriate regulations, any appropriate regulatory documents can all follow in turn to implement that newly revised, reviewed and revised and up-to-date regulatory policy framework and strategy. And yes, our concern is exactly this, that by proceeding now with these regulatory documents, the Commission is de facto potentially making it more difficult for Canada to have as open a mind as it should, and the range of options that it should in the radioactive waste policy framework and strategy. And then I'll leave it to one of the others to deal with the second part of the question.
Okay, I'll first just translate briefly. Donc la réponse est essentiellement oui, ça c'est notre point principal. En procédant avec ces documents réglementaires avant le développement d'une politique et de stratégie pour les déchets radioactifs au niveau fédéral, on peut rendre la tâche du ministère plus difficile et on peut exclure certaines des options possibles qui auraient pu être considérées. Donc, c'est pour ça que ces groupes aujourd'hui demandent que les documents réglementaires ne soient pas approuvés et en fait qu'on attende le leadership de nos parlementaires et de notre ministère pour développer et consulter tous les Canadiens dans le développement d'une stratégie et d'une politique. So the second part was whether these REGDOCs and the approach taken here could spill over, if you like, to international standards, because the head of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has also recently been made the chair of that International IAEA Safety Standards Commission. Would you like to address that?
Well, we certainly hope not. We hope that the IAEA will maintain the rigor of its standards. We were pleased when they updated their decommissioning safety guide that they continued to observe that in situ decommissioning, reactor entombment is not an appropriate strategy. But one must recognize that the IAEA has a bit of a dual mandate, where it is trying also to promote the safe use of nuclear energy, and there are interests in things like small modular reactors. So we definitely hope that the IAEA will continue to recognize its responsibility to ensure that its member states manage waste safely, as well as engaging in research and development.
Just add briefly to the first part of the question, Eva.
Sorry, could I just translate that briefly, because I think there's some requests to have the translated. Donc, on l'a mentionné que le International Atomic Energy Agency, en français, excusez-moi, je ne l'ai pas à bout de lèvres, que cette agence internationale a un peu un double mandat, donc la promotion de l'énergie nucléaire et la sécurité et la santé de l'environnement. Et donc, nous espérons qu'ils vont quand même continuer à poursuivre leurs responsabilités pour la gestion sécuritaire des déchets radioactifs. Sorry. Okay, that's about the best I can do. Go ahead, Bernane.
Yeah, just adding to the first reply to the first question, I want to emphasize again that these regulatory documents are a product of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff, and they are coming now to the Commission on Thursday. The Commission has certainly been given notice that there are concerns among the public, among organizations who regularly intervene at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission proceedings. So I think we need to watch very carefully on Thursday to see the degree to which the Commission can distinguish itself from the staff, and the degree to which the Commission can evaluate staff products and weigh them against or with consideration for advice they're getting from others, such as the organizations presenting today.
Donc, brièvement, Bernane a indiqué qu'on espère que la Commission, quand elle se rencontre ce jeudi, pourra peser entre le travail qui a été fait par le personnel de la Commission et puis les opinions exprimées par des groupes comme les nôtres, et qui pourront peser tout ça et prendre en considération dans leurs décisions. And sorry, there was a request actually I missed translating an earlier response about whether we had contacted different ministers. So, donc je vais juste ajouter, Monique, que oui, nous avons communiqué avec tous les députés au mois de mai avec une lettre détaillée qui expliquait notre point de vue, et nous les avons recontactés de nouveau récemment aussi au sujet de notre briefing. So, in terms of other questions, we will be forwarding the PowerPoint I'm not sure if we'll be forwarding the PowerPoint presentation, but we will be putting sharing the recording of this session online, and we will also share the presentation. We will send it to everyone if you've provided us your email. Are there any other outstanding questions? April, you've been tracking. Is there anything else we've missed?
No, I don't see anything else. I think you got all of them.
Good. And there's a final request to share with others the letter that was sent to MPs. April, will that be possible when we put this other material online?
Yes, and Eva, that letter is also available if you go to oh, I've got it actually in the next slide. Oh, in 2 slides.
Not quite the next slide. Okay.
Our contact slide has the website where you can also find the letter to the minister. We'll also post a link to the recording and the slides on that page.
Excellent. So if we could go to the next slide then, just to sum up. Sorry, one more question appearing, but just to, one final question, ethical investments. Is this something that can be required? Teresa, do you have any comment on that?
Well, part of our concern with all of these REGDOCs is the level of vagueness and ambiguity and lack of descriptiveness there is about them. So I think that as concerns about ethical investing grow and as standards start to be developed that outline the parameters of ethical investing in ways that are, you know, recognized in some way that we can point to in a regulatory standard, then we could start to require that kind of constraint on the investment choices. So it's theoretically possible, but it would require, just as we're saying, we would prefer not, I mean, it's fine to say, think about ethics, but with all of these standards, we'd also like to point to ways to evaluate whether or not the requirements are being met. And so that would indicate some kind of consensus about the ethical investment community.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And I think we'll now wrap up, given the time. It's a few minutes to 12. To sum up, as you've heard, it's clear we're asking that the CNSC not approve these documents until the promised, consider these documents until the promised public consultation takes place, so that policy can be set by parliamentarians, not by the staff of an appointed body. We've called these REGDOCs sham regulation because they impose no requirements that can measure whether the health of Canadians and the environment are protected. L'engagement public et la transparence vont être essentiels alors que le gouvernement fédéral s'engage à consulter tous les Canadiens, parce que ces décisions vont avoir un impact littéralement sur les Canadiens et notre environnement pendant des siècles, des millénaires et même des millions d'années. These decisions have such long-term implications that public transparency and engagement are essential. We should work together to create a Canadian framework for radioactive waste management that will meet or even exceed international best practices. And indeed, we should set a really high standard for others around the world to emulate. Next slide, please. So here we have contact information for all of our presenters, and encourage you to contact them, any of them directly, for questions, looking for further documentation or wanting further briefing, or indeed to work together with us in trying to come up with the best outcome possible for Canadians and our environment. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you for your useful questions, and we look forward to collaborating with you. Merci encore tout le monde d'être venu. Nous avons hâte de collaborer avec vous. Stay safe, everyone. Am I missing any last comment from any of the panelists? Are we okay? All right. Thank you again.
Eva, I would like to add something. Okay. For the question asked by GP Unger, okay. We are very concerned about the lowering of the standard across the world. This is a main issue, and the more precise people will be about what kind of radionuclide they are in the waste and the classification between low and intermediate level, the better it will become. Now we don't have access to enough information about the new nuclear waste. It's not precise enough. And all the scientists should be able to give that information They often invoke security reason, but it's not a reason. We should really know what it's there. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
this is what I want to say.
Thank you, Jeanette. Nous avons besoin de savoir en détail quels sont nos déchets radioactifs, quels sont les niveaux d'activité et comment on peut rester sécuritaire. Thank you so much again to everyone for participating. Stay safe and well, and again, contact us for any follow-up or questions. Any of the people whose contact information is on your screen. Thank you again. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée et restez en santé.